What's up everyone? Welcome back to Just Finish Coding. This is part 4 of our object-oriented programming series on Python. So let's get coding.
Just finished coding.
Now quick interjection here, if you've not watched parts 1, 2 and 3 of this series, please watch them before you come here because we're picking up from where we left off, and for this video to make sense, you need to have a foundational understanding of classes and objects. I'll leave a card for you right here. Please watch those videos and then come right back. If you're still here, I'm going to assume that you've watched parts 1, 2 and 3, in which case here's a quick overview of what we'll be covering in this video. First, we'll be talking about what class variables are, then I'll teach you how you can use them, and finally, I'll also be teaching you on how you can import your own classes into your program. Exciting stuff? Let's get right into it. So I'm going to quickly type out a few lines of code right now, and I want you to think about what's really happening in this case. So print out, and I'm going to say string of math.py. And now when we run this program, you can see that we printed out the value of whatever our interpreter stores as pi, and that doesn't seem to be exciting. But when you really think about it, math is simply a class which is hidden, but it is a class nonetheless. And when we actually print out math.py, we do not actually have any objects initialized within our program just as yet. And that's pretty strange because every time we printed out stuff so far, we needed to initialize an object. And the way we can get around the system where we can directly have variables and all that used without initializing objects and declaring an instance of it is to use something called class variables. So I'm going to delete all of this code and I'm going to type out my own math class, and I'm going to say class math m with a capital M, and I'm not going to inherit from anywhere, so I'm just going to type an object in there. And now our def underscore init method is not really going to contain anything, so I'm just going to leave in a pass. Now I'm going to scroll right back up, and before I get into the initializer method or our constructor method, what I'm going to do is to declare a variable right there. So I'm going to say var is equals to something like 10, and I'm just going to have a string so that life gets easier when we're printing out. So now what I'm going to do is to scroll below to our code, and I'm just going to say print out math.var. And when we do this, and now I run the program, you can see that we printed out the variable without even initializing an object. And sure, we could just, initialize an object and our code would still work. For example, I could just say m is equals to math and just an open and close parentheses. And now when I do this and I change this math right here to be m, now you can see it still does work. And the advantage of this is that all of our objects are going to have that exact same parameter. And additionally, like I mentioned, we can access that variable without even declaring an object. The reason we do this is because it saves so much space on the memory just doing this instead of having, an attribute for every single object called var. For example, a couple of months ago, I had this Space Invaders game that I was making, and I had one class which was called zombies, okay? And within the class, I had a def underscore init method, and I had a couple of parameters, okay? And I'm not going to obviously code in the entire thing. I'm just going to have two parameters right here. One was the X position on my Pygame grid, and don't worry if you don't know what I'm talking about. You'll understand what I mean in a second. And I had basically an X and Y parameter or attribute for my object. And then this was pretty much everything I had. But what I discovered was when I was using my width and height, because each of my zombies was literally just a picture, all my width and heights were basically the same thing. And what I was doing at that time was doing this. So I was saying self.width is equals to 10. And then I had once again self.height is also equals to 10. And this is fine. You could do this. But what is better, and this is a better practice that programmers would often use, is to remove this code right here within our object. And if something's going to be constant for every single object, you'll declare it as a class variable instead. And what you'll do is to just have a width variable outside, and I'm going to say width equals 10, and I'm going to have height equals 10. And by default, if we do this, obviously we're saving some time by not typing out the self. but this is going to make a lot more sense when someone comes to look at your code. So you may think, oh, okay, every single zombie is going to have a width and a height, but each and every zombie is going to have a different X value and a Y value for itself. And that's the whole point of class variables, and it just makes our life a whole lot easier in many more ways. So that was the part about class variables, and now I'm going to teach you how you can import classes into your own code. And to do that, I'm going to delete all of our code right here. And now I have created another file, and you make sure you do this within the same directory. And I've called this test.py. Okay, you could really call this anything. I'm just going to call it test. Okay, and right here I'm going to have a class which is going to be called test with a capital T. And I'm not going to inherit from anywhere. Oops, I'm not going to inherit from anywhere. And all I'm going to have here is a set of class variables. So I'm going to have var is equals to 10, and I'm going to have something else. Let's just say r is equals to 15. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave it as it is. I could have a def underscore init method or a constructor and just leave in a pass statement, but this is pretty much all I'm going to have. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is to head over to the OOP4 file where I've been coding all the while now, and now I'm going to say import, and I'm going to follow it up with test. And since test is a file within the same directory, this would import that entire file. And now the advantage is we haven't really done anything in test, and everything is stored inside classes. So what I can do now is to just say test.test, which is a class within the test file. And now I could just print out that particular variable. Okay, and I could even do this, and you might see people doing this, import test, and then I'll say from test import test, right? You would see people doing even this. And now what I can do is to just say print out string of r, and I'll also print out the string of var, and not just var right here. You want to make sure you say test.var, and same here, I'm going to say test.var, and that is pretty much it. Now when we run the program, you can see that, well, we printed out everything with a space, since that's what this comma basically does. Okay, and the advantage of doing this, right, instead of having everything crowded up in a single file, is really shown when it comes to businesses. So let's just say you had a firm where you you wrote code for other software businesses. And now let's just say you had 5 employees, and together you needed to come up with a big file. And now what you can do is to just say, assuming your employees which is letters of the English alphabet, you could say employee A, you do this class, employee B, you do this class. And now each of them do a small part of the code, and finally one person puts everything together. And if you really think about it, this is how these massive, gigantic mega corporations actually work. And for example, I'm just going to take Google. Google's going to have so many employees who are going to be producing a tiny part of whatever they do. And the advantage is, once again, each employee does a small part, and also the work is more organized. And finally, the much needed benefit is that no one really knows the entire part except the person who's putting it together in the end. So each person only knows a minuscule part of the entire program that really gets the engine of Google running. And that way, the leak of intellectual property is going to be much lesser, since your employees basically only know a fraction of what really makes your program what it is. And that is really how these import statements can be used, especially when we have files in the same directory. And that is pretty much all we'll be coding in this video. I know it was a short one, but stay tuned because part 5 is going to be the last video in the series. And once I'm done with part 5, I'll be moving on into using some specific modules starting with Pygame. So I do hope you enjoy the upcoming videos. If you've enjoyed this video, please make sure you leave a like, and also don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.